Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. Some of the FBI's top 10 most wanted have been captured in recent years, and one of these captured fugitives went by the name of Yaser Abdel Said. The crime that he committed was horrific, and the details surrounding his 12-year time spent on the run are both interesting and shameful, as his own family aided in his time spent free from captivity. This loyalty that was shown towards Said contradicted the loyalty shown toward his victims, his own teenage daughters. Today I cover this disturbing case. Hope you enjoy. A frantic 911 call on New Year's Day 2008 had the community of Irving, Texas sickened. The call had been made by a teenage girl who yelled and screamed down the line, telling the dispatcher that her father, Yaser Abdel Said, was trying to kill her and that she'd already been shot. The lack of intervention must have been horrible, as the dispatcher taking the call could only listen to the horror on the other end of the phone, unable to physically intervene as the phone went dead. One of the girls was in the front passenger seat and the other was in the back. One had her eyes open and blood was visibly dripping from her nose. It was a gory scene, and investigators were dispatched to figure out just what had gone down. The case would rapidly escalate, as following the discovery, it wouldn't take long for investigators to pair the disturbing 911 audio to the crime scene. They learned the names of the victims: 17-year-old Sarah and 18-year-old Amina Said. Based on the frantic 911 call, they also had a prime suspect, the girl's own father, Yaser Abdel Said. But just why would a father take the lives of his own children? They were academically gifted and excelled in athletics at Louisville High School. Sarah had ambitions of going to college and becoming a doctor to help save lives. What would drive this man to kill his daughters, and just where had he gone? As mentioned, the taxicab was found abandoned, and investigators began to consider whether the whole thing had been an impulsive, spur-of-the-moment crime, or if it had been methodically planned. Doing a bit of digging, investigators learned more about the relationship between the girls and their father, and this provided the best insight into a possible motive. Instantly, investigators came to the realisation that there was tension between the girls and their father. Yaser Said was born in Egypt and moved to the United States in the 1980s. He worked as a taxi driver and married a 15-year-old American girl when he was 30. They'd met at a convenience store where he worked, and after only 2 weeks he actually proposed to her. It would take a while, but Said eventually became a US citizen in 1997, and by this time he had 3 daughters, Sarah and Amina being the 2 most notable. His 3rd daughter was from a separate relationship. Said also had a son named Islam, and he'll become very much connected to this case much later on, so stay tuned. Abuse in the marriage between Said and his wife were commonplace, and she'd speak about this much later on when she was free of him. Despite not being vocal about this abuse suffered from behind closed doors, Sarah and Amina were vocal about the abuse in the family home. Investigators sensed that Said was a controlling and sadistic abuser, based on email evidence and home video recordings that he'd made. His behaviour was extremely inappropriate toward not only his partner, but towards Sarah and Amina especially. Some of the most notable examples of this include Said threatening physical harm towards Sarah if she didn't tell him what Amina was up to, holding them both up at gunpoint in December 2007, filming and audio recording them both at their workplaces and even at the family home, attempting to force Amina to get married to his older friend in Egypt when she was only 16, and the most sickening act of abuse was sexual. Yes, Yaser Abdel Said raped Amina on at least 1 occasion. Investigators were horrified by what Said had been getting up to and how long he'd been perpetrating his vile actions. Investigators had all of this information, but not an exact motive for the murders. Said was obviously a controlling man, but what had pushed him to kill the targets of his everyday abuse? They soon found their answer. Both Sarah and Amina had rejected their father's attempt to get them into an arranged marriage to a random person whom would be selected by their father. The killings were believed to be honour killings in which a family member kills another because of perceived shame or dishonour brought to the family. Said's physical and possessive tactics hadn't paid off, and he was furious when he discovered that both Sarah and Amina were dating traditional American boys who weren't part of their Islamic religion and upbringing. This enraged Said, who had been the one who attempted to control who they interacted with, their relationship groups and dating life. He'd been doing this for as long as they could remember. Amina had even reached out to her teacher at school to tell all. She emailed her teacher, telling them that her father had made her and Sarah's lives a nightmare. She continued by stating that both her and her sister didn't want law enforcement becoming involved, because they weren't ready for that. In the days leading up to the girls' murders, both Sarah and Amina had fled to an Oklahoma apartment. They were joined by their boyfriends and even their mother. Everyone was probably fearful and fed up with Said given his deranged behaviour. Said would report them all missing to police and feigned an emotional side at them having gone missing. It was just after Christmas 2007 and Said said that he wanted police to locate his daughters as he needed them. What transpired next is tragic. The girls' mother convinced them both to return to Texas and Sarah and Amina joined her in travelling back. Whether because of the long abuse that she'd suffered or the lack of a place to stay for a long period of time, the girl's mother seemed convinced that everyone would be safe back in Texas. But upon making it back, Amina was reluctant to return to the family home as she knew that Said would be waiting, eager to cause her and her sister harm for defying him. Instead, she chose to go round her boyfriend's house. This stay was short-lived, as her mother soon arrived to force her to return home, and whether this was under direct orders from Said is unclear, but many still see her as playing a major role in causing Sarah and Amina's deaths. The girls were both with their father now, and were taken out for something to eat. At least, that was Said's ruse to get them into his taxi. Said drove them to the hotel parking lot and proceeded to open fire on his daughters from within the taxi cab. Sarah was shot 9 times even prior to calling 911 and Amina was shot twice. Law enforcement by this point had been notified that Yaser Abdel Said was armed and extremely dangerous as he'd been known to carry a weapon at all times. The murders were described as being brutal and cold-blooded. If a person is capable of killing his own 2 daughters, there's no guessing as to what he might be capable of perpetrating against other innocent people. In the coming months and years, Said remained elusive and on the run. Many suspected that he'd fled to Egypt given his roots and connections to the country. Others speculated that he'd moved to another part of the United States. Many other people felt as though he'd retained his career as a taxi driver and could have easily have blended into any Middle Eastern community. As the years progressed with little case progression, sightings of Said were reported on the East Coast in New York and New Jersey. In 2014, the FBI stepped in to assist with the case, making Said the 504th person to be added to the top 10 most wanted fugitives list. They had a strong success rate in bringing fugitives into custody and were optimistic that one day Said would appear. He was probably still in the States and was likely being assisted by his close family. The FBI involvement in the case caused some tension amongst the Islamic community. The honour killing charge was dropped because of political pressure. The fears of offending a group and Islamophobia played into this. However, the murders were classic examples of honour killings. Said reportedly saw his daughters as whores because they had American boyfriends and were becoming more westernised. In his delusional mind, they had broken his rules and needed to pay for it. The FBI faced this controversy but continued working on the case. In 2017, the belief that Said would one day surface was proven right. It was 9 years following the double murders of Sarah and Amina, and a maintenance worker at the Copper Cable apartment complex in the city of Bedford, Texas, actually noticed Said in one of the properties. The apartment in question was leased to Said's son, Islam. The apartment complex is roughly 10 miles from Irving. Said had a pretty distinct face, and the maintenance worker had picked up on it. He felt as though it might have been him, but given the case having occurred 9 years prior, the maintenance worker didn't immediately report the sighting. He would show a week later to repair a water leak, and knocked at the same door. No answer. Believing that nobody was inside, he had the apartment keys and unlocked the door. The interior door was deadbolted. A bit suspicious, he thought. He yelled out once again to make himself known, and it was at that point that a Middle Eastern man appeared and said that it was fine that he fixed the water leak. The maintenance worker did so and soon left. He had now seen the same guy twice, and felt the urge to report the incident, which he did. Given the lease being under the name of Yaser Said, the FBI arrived to question him and intended on bringing Said into custody, but he was gone. Yaser was uncooperative and didn't inform on his father's location. The FBI weren't liking this uncooperative man and managed to secure a search warrant the next day. Evidence outside of the apartment indicated that Said had actually leapt from the apartment and into a bush, and he'd given law enforcement the slip. Inside the apartment, investigators found items like cigarette butts and a toothbrush, which was sent for forensic comparison to Said. Unsurprisingly, the results were 1 in a 5.3 quintillion that the DNA was that of Yaser Said. He had been in the apartment. For whatever reason, it didn't sound like Yaser was arrested despite harbouring a fugitive. His suspicious behaviour continued and he was questioned at the Canadian border, Yaser claiming that he was taking a trip up to Canada following this 2017 incident. Perhaps the FBI knew that Said was going to be around relatives and so felt as though he'd eventually slip up and be caught hiding at one of their properties. Putting them behind bars may have halted the investigation. 3 years passed and on August the 17th of 2020, the FBI were conducting surveillance of a house in Justin, Texas. The house is just under 30 miles from Irving. It was under the name of Said's brother's daughter, and the FBI observed Said's brother and son carrying trash bags outside. When the pair returned to the house, the FBI jumped into gear and scoured the bags for evidence of Said. Much like with the last forensic evidence collected in 2017, a similar situation occurred, but this time, Said wouldn't make it away, and his son had led the FBI straight to him. Said liked to smoke Marlboro Lights 100s and cigarette butts in the bag were matched to him. He was inside the residence. Acting in quick succession, the FBI would conduct a raid on the house the next day. Inside they located Said and both his brother and son were captured and arrested for harbouring a fugitive. Meanwhile, Said faced the death penalty and he had been officially captured after 12 years on the run. Yaser Abdel Said would be found guilty of the murders of Sarah and Amina in August 2022. He was given life without parole for the crime. Yaser Said was handed down a 10-year sentence in 2021, and ironically, Said's brother was given a 12-year sentence for similar charges in 2021. The murders of Sarah and Amina showcased the problem of abuse in the family household, abuse that often takes place behind closed doors, and only becomes more sadistic and extreme over time. I didn't quite realise just how commonplace this type of abuse is. How badly many people have to suffer with physical and sexual abuse at home by people who are supposed to be there to protect and support them. It is a sickening thought that many still face these traumatising problems every day and have nobody to seek help from. Thankfully, Sarah and Amina reached out to voice their misery to others and didn't remain quiet about the abuse suffered at the hands of their father. They didn't die passively, and Sarah's decision to call 911 helped to put her father behind bars for eternity. Rest in peace to both of them. This has been the story of former FBI top most wanted fugitive, Yaser Abdel Said. As always, thank you for watching.